talk about Bitcoin from two perspectives. There's something really interesting shaping up. And back in like June, July, we started to see a, the media narrative started to really change on Bitcoin. And I found it really interesting how the whole world was against Bitcoin, saying that the SEC and the regulatory bodies were really against it, and it was going to be a huge battle and clash. To the media really started to get behind Bitcoin slowly but surely, and now the media narrative is super powerful. But there's something even beyond the media narrative that I want to talk about. In addition to the price patterns and some price forecasting for Bitcoin. As much as I try not to do price forecasting, this, the intention behind the price forecast is just to set expectations rather than to really, blindly go into any price numbers. But when we combine the price and the patterns and the historical patterns with what's happening from a fundamental perspective, there's a really interesting narrative that is shaping up, and that's what I'm going to try to illustrate here. So first, we're going to go into price, and then we're going to talk about some of the news events that are coming up, and then we're going to talk about kind of what that might mean for the price from a historic perspective. So first, we're looking at the monthly chart, the biggest chart, which means that the most volume has gone into each one of these bars, the most money is behind each one of these bars. And what these circles indicate are the typical cyclical lows for Bitcoin. So right now, I have a bullish stance on Bitcoin, but I always try to look at, okay, well, what am I missing? And what we have to prepare for is a December low. So all that I'm going to be talking about here is with the assumption that there's likely going to be some type of weakness in December based on this pattern that we're looking at here, which predicts the cyclical low points or the selling pressure points in Bitcoin. And this one is December 1st. We typically will have a low in the Bitcoin pattern. So with that being said, that could provide a really interesting entry point. But for now, what we're going to look at is the historical cycles of price, right? So the bull and bear market cycles for the last three going on 4 cycles has been very predictable. Okay, so this pattern goes all the way back to September of, or even June of 2010. This is when Bitcoin was in its infancy and it was 8 cents. This chart goes all the way down to 1 cent Bitcoin, right? So the first bull market, Bitcoin went from, basically nothing in June of 2010 to May of 2011, it went to $20. Okay, so just a crazy meteoric rise, followed by a 93.5% sell-off. And that was in November of 2011. And eventually, we saw, again, this crash, this intense crash, followed by a resumption of a bull market. Okay, so if we look and then it happens again. So we have a meteoric rise from 100 to 1,000, and then a 86% sell off, 87% sell off, and then a resumption of the bull, from 1,000 to 17,000, then an 85% drop off, and then eventually a resumption of the bull from, again, 3,000 up to 70,000. So another meteoric rise, followed by an 80% drop off. And that's where we got down to the 15,500. And now we're looking at this reaccumulation phase, getting ready for another rise. So how does this happen? So one of the big things, or I would say the biggest thing that happens in the market, in the Bitcoin fundamentals, is what's called the halving. And in case you don't know, the halving it's an event that happens that affects the Bitcoin computer or the miners. The miners are the computers that secure and account for the network, or they're the computer behind Bitcoin. Again, there's no central, company behind Bitcoin. These are all individuals who, buy and direct their computing power to the network in exchange for the Bitcoin reward. And the Bitcoin reward gets cut in half every 4 years. So that halving event takes a tremendous amount of sell pressure off of Bitcoin, because historically the Bitcoin computer has to fund itself through selling the coins that it's rewarded. So a tremendous percentage of the sell pressure in the Bitcoin market happens from the Bitcoin computer or the Bitcoin miners selling the majority of their coins onto the market. Okay, so when that halving takes place, the sell pressure gets cut in half. And then in the later cycles here, in the last 2 cycles, people are looking in history and they're anticipating that post halving there'll be another meteoric rise. Okay, so demand increases, and the supply gets cut in half, right? So that is typically what creates this meteoric rise. So let's look at this pattern, and let's see what it looks like, or where we're at in the cycle right now. So again, we have the first pattern. We go from nothing. Let's see. Well, when the first time, this is 2012 actually, so this is kind of the second cycle. So we go from 13 to $1,000, $13 to $1,000. This is post halving, right? And then we have this, it's an 80+% drop off, 80 to 90% drop off. Okay, but in this downtrend, there's another technical pattern that's actually very telling, and that is the distance from the trend line on the downside is what's called a measured move. So when that downtrend gets broken, that distance measured from the trend line to the lowest point is measured in the opposite direction to the upside. It's kind of like a potential reactive or a bounce energy that goes from a low to a high once the pattern changes. So here in 2014, the low came in, and that was, X percentage below the trend line. And then in October of 2015, the trend line broke to the upside, and there was a measured move. And eventually Bitcoin found that measured move, and you can see it went right up to the measured move and it dropped. Okay. And here it found support and it went back up. And this is the halving. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6, 7, 8 months after the halving, all-time highs were achieved again. And we went back into that meteoric rise. Post-halving, the supply got cut in half. Demand, people were assuming that there's another meteoric rise coming, and they were right. And then again, this meteoric rise was met by a dramatic sell-off. That's about an 80% sell-off. We went from 18,000 down to 3,000. Okay, and then the measured move once again came into play. The trend line was broken in April of 2019. The measured move came back. It was met that same distance from the trend line on the low side. Once the trend line was broken to the high side, it was that same percentage in the opposite direction took place. And you can see once it hit that measured move, it had a sell-off. It was trying to find support here. And in this case, it didn't find support. And this is about where we are in the current cycle. So it didn't find support, and it was cut in half before the halving, right before the halving, which surprised everyone. They're like, is Bitcoin going to change? And then, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 months after the halving, all-time highs were met again, another meteoric rise. In this case, from 3,800 to 70,000, like 20x. And we, lo and behold, we had another downtrend established. The measured move from the downtrend to the low was measured to the upside once it broke. And now we're looking for this measured move to be realized, right, to the upside. So we're right in this place where we're saying, okay, this is the measured move, and people are looking at this. So the first number is 54,000. And then the second thing is, okay, well, are we going to hold this support level right here, or are we going to get cut in half, and go back down to test the 20,000 level, right? And it's hard to know, but it certainly looks like, number one, because the support is holding. Okay, this is the support right in here. This is the 61% level is what's called the golden Fibonacci level. So it's like everyone kind of looks at that level and says, hey, is this going to hold? It held once here, it held twice here. And now we're actually testing these highs to see if we're going to break out. So it's a very positive pattern. Whether we're going to break to the low and go back down to test the lows or not is unknown. We just don't know. I would say with the December low coming in, like I showed you before, there's a decent chance, but the fundamentals are painting a different picture, or at least they're giving support that whether the low happens or not, it's still a very lucrative play right now. Could be scary, but lucrative at the same time. So what are the fundamentals that are happening in Bitcoin? And again, so like we meet this measured move, we sell off, and then 4 or 5 months after the happening, then historically we will take out all-time highs again. So this 60, 70,000 number, maybe we get up to 90, 100, 130, not sure what it is. Some people are calling for, 400,000 or 500,000, which would be the equivalent to the market cap of gold. A lot of the institutions are talking about Bitcoin, as the digital gold now, which, the Bitcoiners have talked about for a long time, but the public perception, might just, manifest its own destiny, right? But I would think that that's an aggressive, goal, even though last cycle from the lows in the reaccumulation phase to the highs, it was a 20x. So this low to the high, 300,000 would be a 20x. But neither here nor there. What we're looking for now is a kind of like what is the narrative and what's happening in the Bitcoin fundamentals. So that's the price pattern. If you have any questions, you can just reach out to me and I can do my best to answer. But so fundamentally, there's some really interesting things happening. Number one, the number of wallets. So the Bitcoin adoption is taking place. More and more people are buying Bitcoin. The number of wallets that have greater than 1 Bitcoin is at an all-time high. Remember, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. Approximately 5 to 6 million have been lost. So really only about 15 million Bitcoin, in existence. So the fact that there's, more and more people holding 1 Bitcoin, there's 46 million Bitcoin millionaires in the world. If all the millionaires wanted a Bitcoin, they just can't have it, and it seems to me like, that's a very interesting, narrative. But nonetheless, the number of people that own greater than 1 Bitcoin is at all-time highs. The number of Bitcoin that hasn't moved in over 2 years is also at an all-time high right now. So what does that mean? That means that, let's look what 2 years, it means that people held, let's see, so right now we're October of 2023. So if we go back to October of 2021, that means these are people that held Bitcoin all the way up since the $68,000 level. They held it anywhere from 43 to 67,000. That was the price action in October of 21. So they didn't sell at the high, or they bought, arguably they had it longer than 2 years. So they didn't sell at the high part, and they also didn't sell at the lows. So these holders that, again, it's over 50% of the Bitcoin market didn't sell at the highs and they didn't sell at the lows. So that tells us that these people, like the question we ask is, when are these people going to sell their Bitcoin, right? And, because mining, like the supply on the new coin supply on the market is getting cut in half, the other supply are the people that hold. So if the mining supply, if the new supply is getting cut in half, and the longer term holders greater than 2 years are not selling, it suggests all-time highs are in the foreseeable future. If that makes any sense. I hope that makes sense. The next point that's really interesting is people that held over 5 years, almost 30% of the Bitcoin holders have held over 5 years and have not moved their coins, right? So that means that there's more and more, like the number of long-term holders in the Bitcoin market are at all-time highs, okay? Very interesting, fundamental characteristic of the market. The other really interesting thing is when we look at adoption, this FASB is the Financial Accounting Standards Board. They made it very difficult for public companies to own Bitcoin. And the reason is because they were called indefinite lived intangible assets. Now, the accounting standards for indefinite lived intangible assets were you could buy the asset and you can put it on your books for the price you bought it at. If the next accounting period, that asset is lower in value, you have to report it. If the asset, in this case Bitcoin, is higher in value when next annual reports come out, you cannot reflect the increase in value on your annual reports unless you sell the asset. So and this is the FASB, regulatory body that determines this. Now, what they've done is they've re-voted on Bitcoin, and they've put it in a class that allows public companies to show appreciation of the asset. If they bought Bitcoin, let's say at 15, 30, 40,000, whatever they bought it at, they can do an accurate assessment of the market price of Bitcoin when they do their annual reports. So all of a sudden, Bitcoin is, public companies have, the ability to hold it without, significant public perception issues. The other thing that's happening right now, in addition to public companies becoming more and more in the radar of holders, of people that are going to buy Bitcoin for their treasury, so in other words, more and more adoption and more demand, is that the institutions that are looking to create exchange traded funds are lining up, and they've all applied for these SEC approvals. So there's $17 trillion in asset managers that now have applied to sell Bitcoin to their clients and charge a 2% annual fee for that service. So Blackrock is the biggest institution in the world, and they're more powerful than the SEC. And now they've applied for an ETF. By the way, they've applied for 576 ETFs. They've been approved 575 of them. So all signs point to the BlackRock ETF being approved, which means that they're going to be looking to make money by selling Bitcoin to their clients, which means that the demand is going to increase. In fact, they came out yesterday or today and said they're starting to seed their ETF, which means they're starting to accumulate Bitcoin for their fund. Now, they've been going back and forth with the SEC, which is very uncommon. Usually the SEC doesn't comment. They're already in dialogue with the SEC, and they've updated and revamped their application already I think they did it once. So they're in it looks like they're going to get approved, which is going to set the stage for institutions around the world to get, regulatory determinism, basically, so they'll understand what they can do from a legal point of view, and then they're going to, understand how to craft their filings, and they're going to get their ETFs approved. And so more and more demand is coming in from that perspective too. Now, with all this happening and with the halving coming in, it seems to me like the risk reward is to look to accumulate Bitcoin in this area. Now, are we going to go back to 15,000? Maybe. But the chances of us halving is coming up in April 24, the chances of us getting back up into the 60, 70, possibly, significantly north of that, in the foreseeable future after, 2024, 2025, I think it's a very good chance, seeing as though Bitcoin adoption is on the rise. And, the major institutions are coming out, and the media is calling Bitcoin now digital gold, and they're calling it a flight to quality, which makes sense because with all the money being printed and Bitcoin not being printed, but adoption increasing, so supply is being reduced and demand is increasing, it makes sense that it's a flight to quality. So I just wanted to point that picture out. I think that, if someone was going to put $100 into Bitcoin here, they might put in 40 and look for it to come back down in December, put another, 30, right? And then look to put 30 when it breaks these highs again. Something creative, or just to take the position and be okay with the volatility. I hope this helps, and this is my, my true feeling about Bitcoin. I just, you never know what's going to happen. So, do your own research, but Sometimes you see these interesting plays, and it seems to be shaping up in my opinion. So this is what I'm looking at, and I hope it helps.